Hey Enrique, how are you doing?
Good, Jamie. How about yourself?
Very, very well, thank you. So, where my big question is, whereabouts are you in the world? Because obviously, COVID, most people have left their cities; they're not in the where they regularly are. Whereabouts are you at the moment?
I am on the West Coast in San Francisco in the East Bay area. Remained here, moved here about 2 years ago, and just stayed here because I have, family on the West Coast. So it just made the most sense to kind of just stay on the West Coast. But I like to call myself a New Yorker. But I was born and raised on the West Coast.
Oh, really? So, what is it like living in San Francisco? What is it? I've never been.
I mean, somebody recently described it to me as the prettiest dirty city in the world. There's quite a bit of disparity here with the
Right.
homelessness and that population. So if you can envision a beautifully lit picture postcard type of a city, but with an extreme amount of homelessness, it's just everywhere. You just can't escape it. It's every park, for example, has an encampment, as does every off ramp or expressway kind of just has something either underneath it or as you exit it. So it's
Wow.
quite intense.
And am I correct in saying it's got worse over COVID? And has anyone been doing anything about this situation?
I don't know that it's gotten worse. I think it's just gotten more visible. I think people are just now more aware of it. Like folks that perhaps walked by um, encampments or homeless folks are now reaching out and helping, which I think is a good thing. It's a positive thing. Lots of hotels, since obviously COVID, no one was traveling. The hotel industry went belly up. Um, the city was paying for some hotels to actually help house
Oh, that's
some
really great.
homeless.
'Cause that
So yeah,
happened.
so that was positive.
It happened over here in the UK as well. They give a big fund for homeless charities for all the homeless
Yeah.
people to go into like hostels and hotels and stuff. But I think now that funding, I think it was like 45 million, but now that funding's run out, they now technically will be kicked out of their kind of the centers that they established in during this time. And just like I know, obviously, I know like 45 million is a lot of money, but like surely there should be some sort of like support there after the COVID.
Yeah,
It's,
agreed. Agreed. Yeah, like I think it would have been beneficial for example, to create a bit of a permanent address with these hotels so that some of the homeless folks could receive a stimulus check, you know. At this point, some of them might be able to get to stimulus checks, but because they don't have a home address, they're unable to a, register and then be received. So
yeah,
I think that was a huge miss.
yeah. It's that thing, isn't it? Like, if they don't have a home address, how can they do the simple things of having a bank account and all that sort of thing? So they can't
They
really.
don't have a mobile phone.
Yeah,
Everything is on a website. So it just, you gotta put it through their lens a bit in order to really do the
yeah.
work.
Well, aside from the homelessness, I've heard wonderful things about San Francisco, about the kind of weather and that sort of thing, and the creative community. There's lots of creative people there and stuff. Where, so obviously, let's go back before we go forward. How did you get
Sure.
into where you are sitting now? Like, where did you come from? What did your family do?
Um, yeah. So I am Mexican American. I am first generation. I was born in a little town called Wood River, Oregon, which is really, really close to Portland, Oregon, which I think people famously know it for Nike. So I'm about in 60 miles, which is roughly, if you drive safely, about an hour and a half away.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, my parents were migrant workers. Um, I grew up in that world, so it was it was a happy world, but a tough world. You know, and then in addition to that, you know, my parents did the best they could. I was definitely a queer child from birth, so they didn't necessarily have, I think, the tools for that, which made for an interesting upbringing, as well as living in a town that was predominantly um, Caucasian. So, you know, we were one of few families of color in the nearby area. So that upbringing was a bit strange, but it was good in the sense that, like, I think it made me get to know myself quite a bit because I did spend a lot of time by myself. I had an older brother that was definitely in his own world and, you know, had little in common with him. So I definitely spent a lot of time by myself. And through my mother, I think I discovered this idea of beauty and fashion and music. And I mean, I clearly remember my mom putting on Blondie records and um, ABBA records, and you know, and I was just, you know, would gaze at the album covers and you know, think about what wonderful lives these folks led. And it made me acutely aware, I think, of marketing to some degree. I mean, not, I wasn't obviously able to verbalize that as a kid, um, but I was aware of the power of music as it relates to fashion and style and beauty and just like what makes an overall package. And my parents nurtured that because they were just like, okay, cool, like he likes this one thing, so let's just do this for him. You were very, very nurturing. My first toy, adult toy, I would say, that went beyond like the past plastic trucks and things, um, was a typewriter. Um, and that's when I think my love of typography also came into the mix. So I became a little bit more aware of typography and design and layout. And my parents were just very nurturing folks in that respect. Like they saw the thing that I liked and just try to give me as much of it as possible. Um, you know, I remember being, I don't know, 7, whatever years old and looking at a Madonna album cover and being very aware of it and all that it meant, um, from the type design to the, you know, to the image. I think I might have been one of the few kids in my age group that had an idea who Stephen Meisel was because I would look at the credits. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I couldn't, you know, I was also extremely dyslexic, so typography and the shapes and trying to read it was all very intertwined.
Yeah.
So in the efforts of trying to learn how to read properly for myself, it made me, I think, a bit more acutely aware of those characters, those typography characters, I would say. Um, and you know, my parents like once a month would drive us to the big city, which was Portland. Um, and there I discovered music stores relatively quickly, and that just kind of became it for me. And then that got me into magazines. And I remember going to the import section of a import magazine section of a record store and falling in love with ID, falling in love with The Face, falling in love with all these, I guess, publications that were kind of marrying all those things that I was acutely aware of, like, you know, seeing artists on the cover and seeing them being photographed and styled and all the sort of bells and whistles kind of then got me into, I would say, specifically British music magazines and British music. Yeah, so from there, again, who are these people? Neville Brody, Peter Saville, Von Oliver. I was very acutely aware of these people. And I guess at this point I was, you know, 10, 11, 12. And specifically researching them. Like, who are these folks? How did they do it? Like, you know, and from there, I think it just evolved into just being a lifetime lover of all those mechanics, I would say.
Yeah, and something I'd love to chat about is your kind of dyslexic, because I'm also dyslexic, so I totally resonate with you. I'm very, very dyslexic. How did you find that in the education and also in the kind of workplace as well? Because there's a lot of conversation on neurodiversity at the moment, and I'm doing a keynote soon about it. And so I'm interested to know how you also work within a workplace with your, knowing that you're dyslexic, and also knowing that other people might have also disabilities and other ways of working as well in the workplace. How do you find that?
I mean, I think it depends on the day. For me, I think that I mean, my problem I've noticed it is mainly around characters that are very similar, such as a B, a P, a D.
Yeah.
It kind of revolves around that area. It's almost like a mirroring effect that occurs in my mind. So it just kind of throws everything off. But to answer your question about how I deal with it, I have a tendency to read really slow. I read really slow, and there are times where, I read back through emails and I'm like, this email just didn't make any sort of sense. So having to kind of backtrack and say like, yeah, sorry, that didn't make sense. What I meant to say was this. So there's, a fair amount of making sure I triple read something before I send it. Something that I did in New York that was extremely helpful, at least for me, was downloading Grammarly.
Yes, that's one of the best things I ever did.
Magic, yeah, magic. Because and I would pause to think about, okay, like, what did I do wrong? Okay, what can I do better? So I didn't make it a habit of just, clicking, a yes to everything. I really kind of like would take a minute to think about what I was doing. I don't have Grammarly now, but I think it taught me a lot. It taught me how to take a pause, take a minute, read things over, not to rush things. And we live in a world now where everything is by email, by text, by chat, by DM. But that part is hard because I do often make, I think, those same mistakes that I was talking to you about, right? Like if I'm meaning to spell dog, sometimes it's God.
Love it.
And it's one of those things, you know what I mean? So it's just that just happens, and I have to learn how to laugh it off because there's way too much stress in life.
There is.
Someone's gonna come for me for that. It's like, well, maybe they've got bigger issues as well.
I think so. They need to check themselves and look at themselves. If you're getting an email wrong and you're saying, "Can you take that dog out of the campaign?" and you actually put dog. Simple things like that. Mine are more like, I think mine's are like T's and J's. Like I sent an email. I sent an email this morning, and I was meant to put someone's name, and I got it wrong because I put it, instead of putting a J, I put a T, and I was like, oh no! And I stressed over it for like a tiny second, and I emailed them back again. I'm so sorry. This is what it is. And I have before as well in an email. I don't know if you've done this. That sometimes I've reread it, and I have reread it, and then I'll send it, and I think it's still okay, and then I check it again, and for some random reason, the third or fourth time I have checked it and it's been sent, I have missed something out, and then I have gone back and emailed the person and saying, I'm so sorry, my dyslexic brain has caught this typo. This is what I was meant to say. And have you done that before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I also don't try at the same time to, what's the word? To put myself down in the effort of course correcting. I sometimes will just say like, I just made a mistake. you know,
Okay.
I made a mistake following up, because I think that sometimes too, what I've noticed is sometimes people then weaponize that. So
Really?
they'll say, I mean, for me specifically, and I mean, I think that I think bias and race and a lot of other things play into this, right? Um, I'll get questions like, well, did you read it? Did you really read it?
No.
Things like that. Yeah. So, but I think it, you know,
How rude.
and that's a conscious choice that I made, to not sort of overemphasize
Yeah,
the dyslexia, if you will, just because I think my experience is that of, you know, I'm operating in a world that is not, you know,
yeah,
100% accustomed to, you know, speaking to a person of color, I would say.
yeah. Mm. And so, how did you? Did you? So my question always to people who are in seats of kind of leadership is that, did you always kind of want to become a creative director? Like, is that was a thing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, not knowing what that meant. Yes, like I idolized, like I said, like I idolized, you know, Peter Saville and Neville Brody growing up, and Vaughn Oliver, David Carson, and I kind of have stories about all of those folks too, which is interesting.
Please.
And also uh, uh, Jones, who I also met from ID. Um, his name is his name escapes me, but I met him at a fashion show once and lost my mind. But yeah.
But yeah, you always kind of knew that you wanted to sort of go into this sort of area of.
Yeah, like I want to do what they do, right? But they work specifically for magazines, and I think that, you know, as I kept track of them, I saw that they would do other things, right? Like they did magazines, but then some of them also did album covers. Some were also hired to do advertising campaigns
Because
from time to time.
I've always believed that if you're creative, you're creative. Doesn't matter what
Yeah.
industry you're working in. Like, for instance, these people were doing magazines, but let's, for instance, said Honda was like, oh, I really would love your take on it, and have the kind of
Mhm.
fashion eye and bring it into the car world, even though it's a very different sort of like kettle of fish. I'm sure people could, because it's all about just creativity.
Yeah, 100% right. Yeah, and I think that, oh, Terry Jones, that's who it is.
Terry Jones, there you go, that's it.
Terry Jones. And I became friends with his son Matt Jones when I lived in New York, and through that connection, I was able to meet him. And
Mm.
it was a moment for me internally, but maybe not so much for Terry Jones.
It's a. I've had those moments though. Where I remember once meeting Hans Zimmer, and
Mm.
I had a 45-minute conversation with him, right? And I didn't know it was Hans Zimmer for the first 30 minutes, because I didn't know, because I was a massive fan of his music, and I used it in some projects beforehand, and I didn't know what he looked like, because I was like, he's a composer, I don't really know what he looks like. And then this conversation was going on and on and on and on, and then they were talking about like him doing a tour, like a music thing, and he was like, I don't think anyone's going to come and see it and stuff. This is before he was doing the tour, this was years ago. And then the people that I was with were like, no, of course people are going to come see it. And then it kind of, the accent dawned on me, and I literally freaked out inside. I was like stunned for like the last 15 minutes. And then I was silent for that 30 minutes. I was just listening. And then the last 15 minutes, I just went, bah, with all these questions at him, because I realized who he was. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. But it's funny how, like, when you get into a sort of space where you're with people who you've looked up to for a long time, and now you're sitting at the same table as them, it must be such a gratifying feeling to think about your childhood, and like the child in you going, okay, yeah, we've made it. Pat on the back for us.
Mhm. Oh yeah, 100%. Like yeah, I even do the scenario you just described, like sitting across the table from somebody. It happened with me and Peter Saville at my first ad agency that I went to, which is Wieden Kennedy in Portland. they were trying to recruit him at the time to come work for White and Kennedy Portland. And I just happened to be in a meeting. The executive creative director, and mind you, I'm 19 at this time. He didn't want to go. He's like, oh yeah, I'm very busy. I don't want to go. Do you mind going to this lunch for me? And I said, sure. He's like, I want you to interview this guy. I want you to really kind of like interview this guy and let me know what you think. And I'm like, okay, cool. Awesome. Didn't think anything of it. And then somebody said, oh, it's Peter Saville. You're going to meet Peter Saville. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And that's what it was. It was a lunch meeting with Peter and his girlfriend at the time. I think they're still together. She's like an artist that makes clothes, forget her name. And it was myself and Rebecca Mendez, who's another amazing, kind of brilliant designer. And I forget who the third person was, because it just is all a bit of a, it became a bit of a blur because I was just transfixed with Peter and his girlfriend. And after a while, mainly the girlfriend, because I just, I was like, wow, this woman is beautiful. She's like a statue. And I remember specifically she was wearing this Helmut Lang top with all these cutouts. And I was just like, she's like a fashion illustration brought to life. I was just became more fascinated with her. But ultimately, like I was a bit of a, what's the word? I panicked inside, I would say.
And so is there anyone, because I think probably the person that I would probably have a bit of a starstruck, if he was alive, would be Prince. Apart from that,
Oh yeah.
I don't think anyone now I would have a bit of a moment over, apart from Prince.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different now, right? Because I think that, for me, I don't know that those Peter Savills, those sort of Neville Brodys, Stephen Meisels, like they really exist anymore in terms of just like that sort of like uber elevated pedestal type of a situation, at least for me.
Yeah.
I now put younger artists in on that pedestal. Like, like I'm probably more eager to meet Shy Girl than I am eager to meet like Patrick Daughters or something like that. Or
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like it's like,
why
I guess it should be a little bit more samesies, but like, I'd rather meet Shy Girl than say Taylor Swift.
Yeah, but why do you think that has shifted then? Why do you think? Because I feel like that has shifted as well, even within our celebrity culture as well. Because now you have these TikTokers who are becoming celebrities now, so it becomes like the people who are really, really, really famous, and now not so
Yeah,
people in this level.
that's a good question. And I think about this often. I think that I, again, through this love of magazines and I would say even MTV, I fell in love with culture, pop culture, right? So it was like trying to figure out where that thing came from, right? So, Madonna was wearing a comb bra. Okay, like where'd that comb bra come from? Oh, it came from Jean-Paul Gaultier. Okay, Jean-Paul Gaultier studied with, this person. Oh, Martin Margiela studied with Jean-Paul Gaultier. It just creates like this constellation. Yeah, like this constellation of stuff to kind of like chew on. And I think for me, I like to go where things originated from.
Me too.
Like,
yeah,
specifically, I think that, in the let's just call it the pop culture world, there's this sort of rise in hyper pop. And, that comes from PC music. And when I dove into PC music, like all this stuff sort of started to interest me, like just a bunch of different spin-offs and, becoming obsessed with Sophie, who recently passed away. She's an amazing producer that's responsible for, I think, a lot of the recent changes in sound and in pop music. So it just kind of comes from just being in love, I think, with pop culture, I would say. So then I'm more likely to worship somebody like a Sophie than like a, like a Madonna or something like that, right? Because like without Sophie, Madonna's nothing on her record, you know? So it's just
Yeah,
kind of like trying to get to like
yeah,
the origins of things.
yeah. It's so fascinating, isn't it? And it's think of like for me, it's like I'm a massive fan of people before they have the whole sort of hype. Like I remember Sia back in the day when she, like before she was Sia, and I absolutely loved her stuff then, and I thought it was really interesting. And then suddenly it went really pop, but then people then jumped on the bandwagon, and I'm like, but I was already there, like when it was really, really great, and I can see the foundations. And so I'm really fascinated with, again, the journey and like the originators, like how did you get to that point? Like where was the thought process, where was the interjection from this influence over here that brought this person in over here? And you can see it nowadays where like you have, especially with augmented reality at the moment, where like you can see where someone has had that thought, and now you can potentially see where that might kind of interject into this different world over here. To then now that fashion is becoming so digitized, and it's just really fascinating. I just love like connecting the dots. I find it really fascinating. I'm really fascinated by that.
Same. And I think what to answer your question is what it's that process. And I think the love of just like culture and pop culture itself that gets me to sort of, you know, maybe not the fringe, but sort of just the folks that are like a few steps out of the center, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much of that has gone on over the last like year and a half. You got Black Lives Matter. You had the recent protests with Sarah in the UK. We had that. We've had sort of gender pay gaps. We've had so much going on. Trump as well. How do you find that within your kind of creative circle and your space that you'll respond to that creatively, whether it has been consciously or subconsciously, all the things that are happening in.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like, how do I say this? I think just being very hyper aware of what you're saying, how you're saying it, and who you're saying it with, right? In terms of executing any sort of, I think piece of creative, um, you know, I think I've always been inclusive and as diverse as possible in front and behind the camera. Um, you know, from age to ethnicity to gender. I've always sort of been very aware, and I think that now more than ever, you really have to be aware of how you do things and be very, very conscious of what words mean, um, actions. So to answer your question, I think it's just dialed up. It's just now it's like table stakes. Like that's like number one. Like who's making it? How are we saying it? Is it diverse? Is it translating? And to some degree, is it offensive? I think those are kind of hyper points at the minute. So that's how it's changed, at least for me.
Yeah. And so with being sort of such a creative energy, and you've been going from like kind of an ad agency and that sort of world, you're now at a place where you're working at Instagram, for instance. Like, was that a conscious choice that you want to work rather than going to like a fashion brand? Was it a conscious choice that you want to
Yep.
work on that?
Yeah, it was. And I think part of what I wanted to do in terms of like dipping out of the ad agency world is I wanted to go with I wanted to work for a company that wasn't actively creating, I think, more artifacts for the world. Like I didn't, you know, like the idea of fashion is kind of a naughty word. It's not, it's eating itself at the minute, I would say, just because I think um, it's strange for me to see like a lot of the cues that the sustainable fashion folks are doing now applied to runway shows. It's just a bit odd to me because, you know, like you kind of see this sort of DIY-ness that is very, very, I would say, popular on all the social media platforms. Like I'm now seeing that at the Chloe show. I'm seeing it at like YSL, and it's like they're using the DIY detailing and applying it to new clothes, and that it's just it's odd. And I think that's a perfect example of how that whole industry, I think, needs to take a step back and really kind of sort itself out. So that's why I didn't necessarily want to go to fashion. I went to Instagram specifically because I loved the idea of not polluting the planet with more things, right? Like it's a different type of you know, contribution to the world, right? It's all very digital, but that specifically was one of the many reasons. And I think culture and pop culture was part of the brief. Someone who loved, understood, cared about that, and those were kind of the two main things I would say. And on top of just, you know, obviously opportunities and a shift in work environment, and I would say learning from different folks, different types of folks, because I think that in the ad world, lots of egos, lots of you know, lots of folks that I think are a bit out for themselves.
It's crazy, isn't it, that we live in such a society with creativity where basically, I always talk about this, about who owns an idea. Do you find that like in like an ad world compared to into the world that you are now having, that or the experiencing now, that ideas are just shared and we're just being creative rather than going, this is my idea, that's my idea, and that's my idea. And if I said that, someone will listen. But if someone else said that, they won't listen. But it's pretty much the same idea.
Yeah, I mean, that gets a little bit tricky because I think sometimes in any environment, I think when you have influence, you say something in a meeting, you know, 2 weeks later you see it in a presentation. Like, I don't know if this is answering your question specifically, but like it doesn't offend me. It gives me that sort of assurance that people are listening, I guess. Which it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't necessarily offend me per se, but I think I'm currently in an environment where it is a bit more shared, and it's more collaborative than I would say in that agency.
It's all about, for me, it's always been about collaborations, about sharing experiences, and I think a lot more people now have realized, especially with like Black Lives Matter, for instance, that more cultures and more different experiences from life need to be added to people in these teams
Points of view.
and stuff. So the conversations are wider.
Yeah, I think it's opened a space for, I think, not only points of view, but positions, permanent positions for folks of color that maybe haven't had, you know, that door open slightly, you know. I think there's more opportunities now than ever, which I think is amazing. I love that companies really want to open it up for a more diverse group of people, but it needs to come from the heart, right? Like it can't just be, oh, I'm gonna go get Joe Schmo and just for the sake of a PR headline, hire him, her, them, and not know what to do with them. Like that it's just, it doesn't make for a great experience for anybody, because then you're not really even respecting the person, because you don't even really want their point of view, you just really want the PR headline. So that's what, like, I hope a lot of companies are really considering, because I'd almost rather companies not hire people of color if that's not truly what they're going to stand behind. right? Because I think it's way worse to either move somebody or bring somebody in, have them quit their job, and then put them in an environment where they're just not respected. That just seems just horrible.
Also, they're not going to be happy, and ultimately you're not doing anything good for the company, because if everyone feels trusted and everyone feels that they have a place and they have a voice and they're there and they're there for the same reason and the same vision, then obviously your company is going to grow, rather than having multiple different kind of sub conversations and people don't feel secure in where they're at.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
And I think more people who have that sort of leadership mindset can understand that it always will be with the people. And if the people feel safe,
Mhm.
feel that they can communicate and they can also have a seat at the table, and they will work harder, they'll be more productive, and the company will grow. And I think if anyone
Exactly.
just does a, I think everyone is very short-sighted. Well, a lot of people now yeah, I think I'm now going to go on tangent. It's more people, young people now, who have such a short sight in life, and they only see the short game, like as we were saying about the PR stunt, like get that person in because it's going to increase the kind of awareness of our company. But actually, what's the long term? What's the long term goals for the company, for the people that are working here? Because ultimately, you want someone to come to a company and not really want to leave for 20 years. Really, that's what you want, like 10, 20.
Exactly right. And I think that, but like I said, like that has to be part of the company's, ethos moving forward, right? Like if they haven't had those diverse voices, like understanding why and how you can change that, and really wanting that.
Mm-hmm. And so what I'd love to know is why, one question I always ask people is, what has been your biggest sort of challenge? And that could be professionally or could be personally. I'm sure you've had
Hmm.
overcome, but I'd love to know like a big challenge that's made you a better person and a stronger person.
I think my upbringing, and it's all those things, right? It's just coming from a place of just walking in different shoes than people than most of my, I would say, my peers along the way. I think that's made me a strong person. I think it's kept me in a place where I've had a point of view. Um, and my point of view is uh, like I mentioned, it's always been, very, very diverse and very inclusive, and very much in the world of hiring the artists that are doing the thing, right? It's like we're not ripping it off, we're hiring them. We're, making sure that that's part of the equation. So I think having been, for lack of a better word, disenfranchised or whatever, it's kind of has forced me to make sure that I do right in whatever scenario I'm trying to orchestrate. Um, so I feel like that's a strength.
It's about doing the right thing, and I don't think we always. I think sometimes people want to do the right thing, but not consequences, or I think situations. Sometimes people feel like they can't do the right thing. Have you do you feel
Oh
like
yeah.
as a person now that you are confident enough to know if that's the right thing for you? Doesn't matter what's kind of happening in your space, that you need to do that, rather than sabotage what your own kind of mental and mindful sort of like approaches.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down also to a bit of a compromise, right? Because I've definitely been in situations where perhaps all the key players that I've wanted have not been either available, or quite frankly just don't want to do it. And when I get rejected like that, it makes me respect the artist more, which sounds weird, but it just,
Yeah.
it makes me respect them more. So then there's not consequences, but compromises. And I think part of trying to retain integrity of any given project, there's consequences, and part of the consequence to me then is is kind of what's the word? Compromising.
Yeah.
Which sometimes doesn't feel good.
Sometimes I wish I had a magic wand and I could just like wave it, and then someone, if I asked someone to do a project, they'd be like, yeah, okay, yeah, and get loads of yes. But it's also really great though for this for the struggle as well, to have those sort of compromises, because having that friction, to have those no's that person can't do it, and then suddenly you go, actually they weren't probably the best person. Now maybe if we go this way, inject a totally different flavor, different style, and then suddenly it becomes something totally different, and then you go, actually it's much better now with that person rather than the person I really wanted.
Right. It almost did you a favor to some degree.
Yeah, exactly that. So as we come to the end of our podcast episode, I'd love to know what we do here. We do a give back. So I'd love to know, what would you give back to one, either your younger self or someone that's listening that has inspired you? It could be a mantra, could be a poem, it could be a book or a film that you've watched or read.
I think for me, it's about knowing who you are. Is the big one. I think especially in a world of let's just say a creative output, knowing who you are, and understanding why. Right. And I think it probably, not saying that every person out there is spending a lot of time on their own by themselves, but really doing a deep dive, thinking about who you are and how that who you are can be part of the work that you put out to the world. Because only then, I think, will work not feel like work. It'll feel like you're just living your life if you position yourself in a way where you're just doing what fulfills you.
So true. I think a lot of us think that we're being on kind of a conundrum. We think that we're being ourselves. We think we're being our truest version of ourselves, and we do something on the basis of what expectation is around us. And then you get to a situation where you're not fulfilled, and then you have to re-question, going, actually, that wasn't really me. That was influences from around me or expectations from around me. But actually diving much, much deeper, and then finding my true, authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
So much.
Exactly right.
So much to that. Well,
exactly.
I want to say thank you so much for coming on 360 yourself. It's been absolutely a pleasure. And I'm sure everyone will come away really, really enlightened, and they'll come away hopefully knowing themselves a bit better as well.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, and great podcast, great work.